these yellow things. So once everything is starting to get complete, you'll start to see it keeps track for you. So you hopefully can't forget things that you haven't done. When you go to my colleges, now you can see here's Dartmouth and here's Emory. So if I click Emory, it shows all of their information. You can click back to Dartmouth. So as your kid adds schools, it's going to start to add all of these different, you can shrink it here. But these are the different schools that will start to show up. So we'll go into detail. That's where you'll see all of the supplemental questions. So again, remember the Common App is where it's all of that general information. My colleges, I'm going to start with the Common App, and then we'll go back to that to see all of those specific questions, essays, anything they might add. So I'll pause for a quick second. Does anybody have, feel free to type, and I can keep going, but type in here. That's just generally kind of what it looks like, how to add schools. Hopefully that's pretty straightforward, but let us know if you have any questions. Okay, so Common Apps, we're going to start here. So there's tons of information. Some of it's very straightforward. Some of it gets a little more, not confusing, but just not quite as intuitive, and there's some tricks that might be helpful. So as you go into the Common Application, these are all the different sections within it. And once you click through, there's lots of different parts of it. So it starts with the profile. This is just, your first name, last name, very basic information, your address, other contact information for email. I'm going to click through on demographics, because this one we get a lot. So this one, a lot of people ask these questions. We'll come into religious preference, different areas about your ethnicity, and once you click in, you can choose multiple ones if you relate to different, to multiple ethnicities or areas. Technically, these are not required. So a lot of people ask, is it beneficial? Should I do it? There's really no official answer to say whether this will help or hurt you. In theory, we're all told that this is used to, for the education system to collect information. So when you see stats from different colleges that say, we have 10% of students who identify as Hispanic, or those type of statistics, this is where it's coming from. So it's supposed to be general knowledge, but a lot of people aren't necessarily comfortable submitting this information. So there's really no right or wrong way. It shouldn't hurt you, but if you're not comfortable, if you don't feel right about it, it's not technically required.
Marissa, yeah, somebody was asking, can you choose not to include your race?
Yes, you can. So again, this isn't, most things in here are not optional. That is one of them. And I wish I could say like, absolutely don't do it. It's, people will use it against you. It's nothing like that. It's really a personal preference. It's, again, supposedly used for general statistics for the education system to keep track of the type of people who are attending colleges, what kind of colleges they're attending, all of that information. I believe there might be some schools who may require it within those school-specific things, but as a general rule, you shouldn't have to submit it. If you ever have any questions about a specific school, let's say your kid is applying to Emory and you just want to know more, you're not comfortable, it's their top choice, and you want to make sure you're doing it right, I always recommend reaching out directly to the admissions counselors at schools. Whether it's about financial aid or questions, they're super helpful. So if it comes to a specific school and you have a question or you've heard something, again, I'm going to give you the most general information, but don't ever hesitate to call to ask them specific information or to research information about specific schools and how they use this information, because everybody does vary. So let us know if you have any more.
Marissa, there's a question which is relating to what you're saying, but it's probably going to come up again. But can you change the information after each school's submission so it can be specific to each college?
Yeah, great question. We'll get into more of the nuances of that as well. So in general, you can make changes to things as often as you want, except for essays, which you can only do 3 times. And we'll get into that when we get to the essays, but hopefully there's things, people say you can make changes. Hopefully you won't want to. Hopefully your kid will want to present themselves in the same ways, but maybe you made a mistake, or maybe you've learned something or you need to change. So you can make you can submit it to one school, go in and change all of this information, and then submit it to the next school, with the exception of some of the essays, which you can only make, it's just that personal statement, and I'll show you where that is. You can only make 3 changes to, and even if that's a comma, a period, or you delete the whole thing and add something new, that's something you can only make a limited number of changes to. And again, we'll talk about it. I hope you don't have to, but maybe your kid has some questions, but in general, you can change like the rest of the information. So it's a really great question. So getting back into the nitty-gritty of this profile. So geography, this is asking, what country you're from. Are you a U.S. citizen? Number of years you've lived there. Language, this is where if your kid spoke any other language. So here, close this out. So you'll see actually with a lot of the Common Application, it's really helpful. Things auto-populate as you fill it out. So this is why I really recommend your kid just like go in there and fill as much as possible out as soon as they can. So, if I click into language and I hadn't filled anything out, I could then go in and say, I speak 2 languages, and then more things continue to pop up. And this is the case with a lot of different parts of the Common App. So start answering those questions, because you're going to start to see more things come up. And if you have questions, you just want to make sure it's not a surprise down to the deadline. So I say 2 languages. Let's say English is one. And I would say this is my first language. And then Spanish, maybe I don't speak it, but I can read and I can write. Or maybe it's spoken at home. You can click multiple things. Talk a little bit about citizenship. So again, things will pop up as you self-select. So just something to be aware of. And then the Common App fee waiver. This may not be applicable to everybody, but for people who are in different financial circumstances, talk to your college guidance counselor at the school. They will be the ones to help you see if you might be eligible for a fee waiver. So for each school that your kid applies to, there actually is a fee, and sometimes they're different prices for each specific school. So if you qualify, if you think that your financial aid situation, if your kid's ever taken the standard like an SAT or ACT and they've qualified to get a fee waiver for those, you might also be able to get a fee waiver for the Common Application as well. You can always reach out to the schools individually as well if you think this applies to you. If your kid really wants to apply to school and you absolutely can't afford it, things like that, this is where that information would go. And again, talk to the school specifically, talk to your school's guidance counselor to see if that applies to you.
Marissa, there was one question about when you mentioned about the languages. Somebody said, if I studied Spanish in school but not great at it, do you include that as a language?
Yeah, great question. So that's where that proficiency was. So is it their first language? If they are, I took Spanish in school, I don't speak it well, but I might, back in the day, I would have probably said I can read it, or I can read and write. So, you don't want to lie, but I think it's fair to say if they've taken it in school for a couple of years, they've kind of learned that, but maybe they don't have the proficiency to actually speak it. There's kind of the different languages. And again, you don't want to lie. You want to be as truthful as you can, but do what feels like the right answer. Anything else there?
Not right now.
All right. Awesome. We are breezing through this. I'm so excited. Okay, so the next one is education. So this one is where you would type in, I'm just going to click to find a school. You would type in, you could browse through or just start to type in your kid's name of your kid's high school. And this is important because there's a lot of different, every school is very different. So with the classes that are available, the rigor of the school, things like that, college admissions officers, they have people who are local to each kind of state or city, depending how big it is, who are aware of all these changes, so, or the discrepancies between each. So you would type in the school, how long they've been there, is it a boarding school, will they graduate from that school? All of this information, the job title for your counselor's name, and then other secondary schools. So some people maybe didn't attend all 4 years at the same school. So maybe I went to 2 other schools. You can click those as well and put the dates that they maybe attended different schools. Colleges and universities. So this is where if your kid has maybe taken any college level courses at a community college, a local college nearby, dual enrollment means maybe they've taken a college level course that they've gotten high school credit for. That's where dual enrollment with high school would go. Maybe it was just a summer program. It could even have been a language course or something that, maybe it didn't count on their high school transcript, but they took a summer program or did some classes, any other credits awarded by colleges. All of that information would go in here. So don't forget, if they have attended those summer programs, this is really great. It's shown that they've, taken initiative, gone, ahead of some of their classmates. So don't forget to include that information under colleges and universities. Grades.
Sorry, Marissa, another quick question, kind of along the same lines, but can you change career interest once application has been submitted?
Yes. Love this question. People ask this often. So, and I'll talk about the career interest just for a second here. A lot of people ask, should you leave this as undecided in general? Some people might just say, you're applying to a music program at one school, and then at a different school, maybe they don't have a music program and they're more interested in applying to the general, science and arts program. So you can do different ones. And then a lot of people ask, should you do undecided versus, say an actual career interest. So I always encourage kids to pick a career interest, but make sure that it matches what they're talking about in the rest of their application. So, for instance, you don't want to completely make something up. It should be part of your story. And if you put, let's say I wanted to put marine biology, making this up. You don't want to put that and then your kid has never done anything related to that in any of their activities. They never write anything about it in their essays. Maybe all of their essays about loving music. So you wouldn't want to have something that's mismatched. You really want to make sure that your kid is telling a holistic story about themselves. So that's the nuance, to make sure whatever they do choose really matches up with the story that they're telling about themselves. Because at the end of the day, that's how your kid is going to stand out. That's how colleges see what they're passionate about, what they're going to bring to the school. And even if they're undecided, let's say, I don't really know, but some of the things I've done have been going in this kind of biology sense. I would put marine biology, even if I know when I get to the school, I'm not positive I'm going to do that. I still recommend absolutely putting that and telling a story around it. Again, it's important to have a story to tell, but it's better to do that and then get to the school and say, you know what, I actually hate marine biology. I'm going to study, Russian literature. They're not going to be held to it. With the caveat that some specific, and sorry, feel free to ask questions here because this can be a confusing part to parents. Within a school, I'm going to talk about University of Michigan for a second. That's where I attended. There is a school of engineering, a school of music, a school of, we called it literature, science, and the arts. There's a business school that's separate. That's what I went to. And those you do have to apply separately too. So, if your kid is applying to, saying they're interested in engineering and they're going to go to the engineering school, within that, they can, choose different engineering, whether it's electrical engineering or mechanical engineering, they would choose within that, but they can't necessarily major in business unless they apply to that school. So it's really important to think about, what your kid is really interested in, and make sure you do that research within each of the different schools that they're applying to see, if the story you're telling about the career interest, if that's the actual school. If they're unsure, mostly they're probably going to be applying to those general kind of like literature, science, arts programs. And within those, there's a ton of flexibility to major in, psychology, languages, history, political science, communications, all of those kind of general things that aren't super specific. If they say they're interested in political science and want to study something else, they can. So I know I kind of went on a little bit about that. So does anybody have any questions about this aspect of it?
No questions about the major part, but keep going because there's a few more questions about what you're about to talk about.
Okay. So when we get into the grades, you'll see some schools have different class ranking system. So you put the class size, how it's ranked, your cumulative GPA, GPA scale. So some schools are out of a 4.0, some are out of a 5.0. So this is where you get into the specifics of self-reporting, weighted versus unweighting. So hopefully your kid will know a little bit about this, but feel free for them to ask their guidance counselor, their college counselor. If they're not sure about any of these parts, their guidance counselor should be able to give them this information. So weighted is like, unweighted means, if you took all of your classes and got an A in every class, then unweighted would be a 4.0. Some schools have weighted GPAs, and that means if you took an advanced placement class, for example, and you got an A in that class, you might actually raise your grade to a 4.5. And that's what weighted means. It's like above a 4.0. So again, just make sure your kid probably has a good understanding of this, but this is where you self-report. And then it's really important at each school, the guidance counselor is usually responsible for submitting the actual transcript. So in theory, people could, don't ever rely on this, people. If I can tell you anything, in theory, if you only self-reported, you could make anything up. So make sure it does match what you know. And then the guidance counselor, and double check that they're doing this for you, should submit that actual transcript when your kid is applying. And then oftentimes it's called a mid-year report. They'll even require students to submit their grades after the first semester to make sure that they didn't completely just take like totally different classes that are, like you're taking study hall for 6 periods, or, you've got an F because they just, totally stopped working their senior year. And they can withdraw applications, admissions, if things like that really change. So that's where people do say to keep up the hard work, and that's where things are officially submitted versus this self-reporting here.
So Marissa, 2 questions. One is, the question is, my high school doesn't rank. Will that affect my child?
It will not. So this is where it's so confusing because every school is so different, and it can be frustrating. Like when we get to like the honor section and things like that, where it's like some schools give tons of them and some give none. Some have weighted GPAs, some don't. Some have this class ranking you're asking about, and some don't. And that's absolutely okay. Like there's nothing you can do about that. It's that school. So know that all of the college admissions officers are absolutely aware of all of these differences between each school. And they have experts like for each area who are really familiar, it's kind of crazy, like with all of the different schools. And they'll know that there is no class ranking or how competitive those schools, some schools are just like super competitive and really rigorous. And so if your class ranking is lower at that really competitive school comparing to someone who's higher ranked at a public school, maybe they really do take all of this into account. So
yeah, and just to add in, most high schools actually have what they call a school profile, and it's almost like a summary of the school, kind of all the things that Marissa was saying. Each school can actually put in different information, but they try and give a sense of the statistics for the school overall. So that's another way that colleges and college admissions officers know what's going on at that particular school. They all have access to the school profile. And in fact, you as parents and students should have access to it too. Sometimes high schools put it on their websites, and if they don't, you absolutely have the right. And I would, and I've done it in my kid's school, go to ask your child's college counselor at school, or they go into the school office and say, can I have a copy of the school profile? And you will see exactly what that school is sending out to colleges and to college admissions offices. So it might be something worthwhile. There's another question about the grades. Juliana is asking, is it the cumulative GPA from 9th through 12th grade, or just the GPA from 10th to 11th, or something else?
Yeah, so this is where I would check and make sure. Sometimes schools have different nuances. So I feel like annoying saying that, but you do want to check and make sure with each school to see what they say. So for example, like some of the UC California schools only take into account like from 10th grade on, but they look at what course, they will go in and look at the grades that they got. So in general, it's like the full year of schools is kind of how you should take that into account. But if you have any questions about specific schools, sometimes it is helpful to research and see what they say. But in general, you can kind of assume it's the full high school experience. Okay.
Marissa, sorry, one other quick question before you go on. This is also about like making changes to the Common App. So the question is, if you submit the Common App and you realize you made a mistake, if you change it right away before the school downloads it, will they get the correct version? I've heard something about it being in the cloud for a while, and this might be okay. Do you know anything about that?
Interesting in the cloud. I haven't heard about that, but as a rule of thumb, once it's submitted to a particular school, I would assume that there's nothing you can that is it, that's final. You can then go in and change those errors before you apply to future schools. And if it's if we're talking like something on an essay, something like that, you want to change, I wouldn't assume that you can make these tweaks, but assume that it's submitted and it is done. But if there's mistakes that you've made that are I put the wrong grade or the wrong score, or things that aren't accurate, you can call the school and or email, communicate with the school. They do have processes for things that are inaccurate, but if it's just kind of a mistake about wording or grammatical mistake, those aren't really things I would assume that you can make changes to. For what's submitted, you can then go in and make those changes before submitting it to the next schools. Okay, anything else, Debbie, before I keep going?
No, sorry, you can go ahead.
Cool. Okay, so current or most recent year courses. So this is where your kid is going to put in those classes that they're taking this year. And most of you, I imagine, have seniors, so it's a little late to choose the classes now. But this is, and again, you can choose the number of classes that they're taking, all of that. Because when you submit your transcript, a lot of times kids are applying during this first semester, so they don't have grades from this year yet. So this is where colleges can see, is your kid still challenging themselves during the senior year? What classes are they taking? They still take this into account, even though they may not have grades yet until they submit that mid-year report. So honors. Okay, this one I want to talk about for a second because it can be confusing. So honors for this, remember we're in this education section of the Common Application. So any honors here are academic honors. So a lot of parents will say, what about a music honors, MVP of a sports team, or something like that. Unfortunately, those do not go here. Those go in the activities section and on the resume, and we'll talk about that in a minute. So these are only academic honors. So that might be, for getting a certain some schools might give honors for having a certain GPA for a certain number of semesters or each semester. This could be, if your kid won an award for Science Olympiad, or a book award from a school, anything that has to do with academics, that would go here. Some schools give these out heavily, some don't. It's okay not to include, if you just don't have any, that's okay. Super rigorous competitive schools, there probably will be students applying who do have honors. As you click on them, they auto-populate with how many you can do. So you can say what, you would type out, book award or, you know, academic honors for receiving certain GPA. You just give a brief explanation of it. Click on what grades they received these awards. Could be multiple, just one. Levels of recognition. So if this is just an award within the school, like, you know, for those who get GPA qualifications within that school, state and regional, let's go back to that science Olympiad, maybe it's a state competition, that's where you know, you're clicking on the level of where it is. If it's a national or international award, that's where you would identify that. And then you can list out those, and it only lists, I say it only lets you list up to 5. Some people are like, oh my God, we don't even have any. That's okay. If your kid has more than 5, pick the ones that are most impressive. So those would be, you know, as international, national, state, you know, as you get bigger and bigger, those are the more impressive ones. Or maybe ones that it's like only 1 out of 100,000 people win versus, you know, 1 out of 10 people win it. So put those most impressive ones. So that is the honors.
Marissa, a question. The question is, what about a heavy theory award or certificate of merit piano?
So I'm not familiar with that specific award, but it sounds like for piano, it's the non-academic award. And while that is very impressive, that would go under the activities section. And there will be some, I'll show you when we get there, how you can still make that kind of top of mind and sound impressive. But for this particular section, let me just scroll back up under education here. These are where it would be anything relating to academics specifically. And then this activity section, when we get there, is where for music, for sports, for any kind of like community service or any kind of awards that are just not related to academics would go. That's a great question. Okay, community-based organizations. You can choose, oops, where I self-selected this. Again, they auto-populate for different amounts. Organization from which you received the most help. So this is where you would choose if you've had assistance for filling out the application. So it wouldn't be anything like this, but this is like if they're part of the Boys and Girl Scouts, just kind of some of that organization information. And then future plans is where we talked about, so I won't go all back into the detail now since we've already covered it, but that's where that would go. So this is where you can self-select what kind of career they might be interested in one day. And again, this is where I really recommend to choose something that helps them tell that story. They're not going to be held to this. They don't have to become an accountant here if that's what you choose. And then highest degree you intend to earn. So, you know, this, again, you will never be held to this. If your kid thinks maybe one day they might be interested in a master's degree, put it down. No one's going to say at the end of graduation, you put this on your application, you must go do this. But make sure it tells their story. So if, you know, your kid is saying they want to become a doctor one day and then you only put a bachelor's degree and you don't choose medicine or law, again, they're never going to be held to this, but put what makes the most sense, you know, like in your gut, what feels right with the story that they're telling. That's all of that education section. I want to try to breeze through these, so I'm going to keep going, Debbie, unless anybody has any questions.
Nope.
So cool. Testing. So this, I know people can get confused about this. So here we have ACT tests, SAT tests. So I'm just going to click on ACT. Second to load. So here's kind of like the transcript like we talked about before. On the Common Application, this is where you self-select, put in the information based on your own knowledge, based on the scores that they've already had. And then they're also going to be required by schools to submit, so like for the SAT, that is through the College Board. So the ACT has their own website, and you'll need to go, your kid will need to go in whichever test they take, one or both, whatever they've taken, they'll go to the College Board website, for example, for the SAT, and you have to pay to submit official score reports to the schools that you're applying to. So don't forget to take this step. It's really important. I'm going to show you how to self-report. But they're also, again, this is just to make sure that people aren't actually lying about the scores that they've received. So let's say I took the ACT. I want to report 2 different schools. So it says, like, did you take the writing? Will you be taking this again in the future? So some people might be trying to take it one last time and you don't have the score yet. So you would put, I'm taking it in the future. Maybe I'm taking it in November of 2018. This is where you put the highest composite score. That means that total score, maybe you received a 33. And the date that you received, again, composite is all different parts of the section. So you did it in February. I won't go through all of this, but you put the date. And then for these, so the composite score is all of it. Highest English score, English date, highest math score. It breaks down the different ones. So if your kid has taken the test twice, let's say, and the first time they got a higher score for English, and the next time they got a lower score than they did, but they got a higher math score, this is where you just put that highest score. And then the nuance is this is each school sometimes wants to know different information. So when they go in to send the official score report, some schools will want to see, if your kid has taken SAT 4 times, they're going to look at all 4 of those scores. This is rarer. Most schools just want to know that highest composite score of, they'll take the highest math and the highest reading and put it together. But every school is a little bit different. And if you have any questions about this, most schools for the individual, go to that school's website. If you can't find it on a website, pick up the phone and call, but it's a lot of times pretty clear about, which they require. And then this is the same for the SAT. So does anybody have, I know that confuses people often. Does anybody have any questions about how that works?
No, not yet.
Wow. All right. That's awesome. So yeah, we can hop back to it later, but that's a general difference. So activities, this is a big part too. Activities and writing are where a lot of the questions come in. So for these, your kid is only allowed to have 10 activities. So activity 1 is here, and then as I would scroll down, you would add another, add another, add another. Take a sip of water real quick, sorry. Again, similar to the honors, when I say you can do only 10, some parents and kids are like, oh my gosh, but we have so many more things. How can we ever fit it? And some people will say like, oh my gosh, my kid only does 1 thing. Like, how could I even fill this? I want to say you can be creative with the activities. A lot of people forget to include things that can be counted here. So anything that is not something that goes towards their GPA can count as an activity. And I say that because most parents think of things like a sport that they play, or maybe a musical instrument, or the debate team, or things like that. But don't discount anything that your kid has maybe even done by themselves, or it could be Girl Scouts and groups. It could be that your kid has taught themselves how to learn the guitar via YouTube videos, and that counts. Maybe they're teaching themselves how to learn a language, or they've formed a club with 3 other friends of how to program an app or gaming, or they've volunteered to, they host a bake sale every year that raises money for a charity, things like that. All of these things can and should go in the activities section. So if it feels like your kid isn't doing anything, chances are they're doing more than you realize, and make sure that goes here. If you do have more than 10 activities, you want to choose the most important ones. For those I can talk later, I have an online course. If anybody's interested in learning more, I have a great worksheet that kind of helps you score the different parts based of the different activities, based on how many years they've been you can kind of see in here, were they doing these activities? You would check 9th, 10th, and 11th grade, or maybe just 12th grade. Was it just during the school year? Was it all year? Maybe it was just during the summer. That would be during the break. How many hours you spend per week? How many weeks per year? Things like that. And then ask if they'll be interested in doing this in college as well. For the most part, I would say yes here. Again, if your kid is on the debate team and they don't do debate when they get there, that's okay. But if they have any interest in it and it's kind of part of their story, make sure to click yes here. And then also to make sure that they put, just gonna click on here, do the activities in order from so activity 1 should be the most, I say, quote unquote, impressive. And then as it gets quote unquote less impressive, down to activity 2, 3, 4. So it is really important to put those in that order from, the most involved, most impressive activities down to the least. And again, I have a worksheet inside my course that helps you do this, but the way you think about that is their involvement. Again, how long they've been doing it. So if it was like just something they only done for a month of senior year, it's going to be less impressive than something that they've consistently done maybe 10th, 11th, and 12th grade. The same as like if it's just a small thing that they do each summer versus something that is a year-round activity. Think about something that's like just maybe a small club that they're in at their school versus maybe they're involved in a state level activity, and then any recognition that they have as well. So if they've been recognized at a state level for being on a debate team, that might be more impressive than another club that they're part of that they've never won anything for. So it can be a little bit confusing. I can help within the worksheet to rank those activities, but you'll have a feel for it, for what you feel is most important. Do you have any questions? Does anybody have any questions here?
Yeah, one question. I mean, you kind of went over it, but I'll ask to be fair. It says how to answer if you intend to participate in that activity in in college, if you're not sure. If you're not sure if you might want to do it in college, but you're not sure.
I would say yes, if you're not sure. So some things like might, making this up, like if it's Girl Scouts and you're going to get to college, you're never going to do anything with that again, don't put yes. If it is maybe, can't think of like a sport that you think you might want to keep, even if it's just a club soccer team in college, or they might want to, they play the violin, and it doesn't have to be necessarily anything official with the school, but if it's something that they've been doing, I would generally put yes, unless it's something they can't keep doing, to show that it's something that is important to them and they're going to add value to that college by continuing to do that activity.
Okay, and then there was one other question. It's kind of going back a little bit related to the test scores. It says, if I select the future October test date but decide I don't want to send the score, am I still required to send the score?
No. So that's, they want to know like if they should be on the lookout for another score, but people change their minds. People decide not to take the test. So answer it to the best of, your kid should answer it to the best of their knowledge at that time. But even if they don't say they're going to take it and then they do, you can still send that score. If you say you're going to and you don't, things change and they know that, but it's kind of like just to help them be on the lookout if they think that you're going to be sending a score, because maybe, your kid applies to a school and it's like they're the perfect candidate, but their score is a little bit lower than they might want, but they know that your kid is going to be taking it one last time. Maybe they'll kind of like put a note to go back and check a couple weeks after that test date to see if anything's changed. Again, that being said, they're going to get the official score report if you just send it anyway, but to the best of your knowledge to kind of put that information.
Okay, Marissa, a few more questions.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to enter honor roll for an award, should you enter it for 12th grade if right now you have honors grades, but official term 1 grades are not out yet? I was thinking you should check the 12 box because it might look suspicious like you aren't getting honors this year.
Interesting. So yeah, you would want to put only things that they've actually received so far. But in whether it's the resume or oh, sorry, we didn't go. Let me go back to the activities. Sorry, this was on roll. Yeah, you wouldn't put anything that hasn't officially happened yet. And in different activities, you can put, yeah, for that one, you really couldn't say. I was going to say, you could say like, on track to receive it, but you really have no idea. So for those, unfortunately, you can only put what's happened so far for an honor like that.
Okay, and then another question is, what about the wording? Do you use personal pronoun or resume style?
Yes, I'm glad you asked that because I meant to cover that. So with those, it's more resume style. So these, the word count here is pretty limited. So, if when you're typing, you wouldn't want to put, like it says, please describe this activity, including what you accomplished, any act in recognition you received. So if it's the debate team, you would put like, maybe your president, comma, oh, sorry, I can't think right now, but you would put like president of debate team, and then, or sorry, president debate team, comma, received X, received, whether it was, let's say it was a piano award, I forget what it was called, received, this award given to 10 out of every 100 participants or something like that. So don't feel like you have to write full sentences here. In fact, I encourage you not to, so that you can fit everything that you want. Be specific here with the recognition of if they've won an award or received any sort of, most valuable player, or anything like that. If it's given to 3 out of every 100 students, or voted on by classmates, things like that, like to show how you've won them, why they've won them, how that recognition is received. And then that can go, sorry, the president goes up top here. That would be any sort of leadership and description of the organization. So some if I say president of the debate team, people know what that means. If you're saying secretary of the, I'm going to make something up, like the Math and Honors Society for, that's kind of more sense in the name, but if it's something that's not in the name, maybe community service they've done, or a club that just, isn't super common, that someone wouldn't necessarily know what it is, make sure you give a quick description of what that is. So if the name doesn't explain in super detail what that organization does, maybe they volunteer. I'm thinking there's an organization I used to volunteer for in New York called like Harlem Sports, what was it? Like Harlem Sports Organization, and it helped youth athletes who didn't have enough money to compete, and you would volunteer. So I would say like Harlem Youth Organization, comma, like helps kids participate in shorter. Could say like athletic organization for. Sorry, I'm not doing a good job. It's shorter here, but you can see it's pretty limited. So just be as descriptive as you can within those within these 2 boxes, to make sure that if someone had never heard of it, they understand what it is, what your kid has done, how they've been involved, any awards they've won, and how that recognition is given. And then in the resume section, not all schools require them. Some schools actually won't let you submit a resume, and some are optional. But I always recommend submitting resume. And inside my course, I teach exactly how to do that, how to write strong resumes. But that's where you could give additional information about all the different leadership. If they were a treasurer one year, and then the president, and then, a different level throughout the year. So when you do these, it would be like the most impressive. If you were part of a school newspaper and you were like an assistant one year and then editor your senior year, you would just put editor. But on the resume, that's where you could break down more of how they've improved and the things they've done over time. Any questions there?
Nope. I think, one last question. Should I have a resume to only one page if lots of activities?
Absolutely. So I always recommend, and I can teach people how to do this inside my course, but the resume is one page, never more. Even people who have been in 20 years of working, still it should be one page. So for your kid, just in high school, they should definitely be able to keep it this way. And I can teach you ways to do that. And there's different ways to set up the formatting of it and the wording, but definitely absolutely keep it to one page only. Okay, I'm going to move on because we're coming close to time. I don't want to keep you guys all night long. The writing here, so this is a personal essay, and this is the one I mentioned earlier where you can only, this is like really the one part of the application you can only make a couple of changes to. And this is what this is personal essay, what a lot of people refer to as a personal statement. So for most, you'll see as we auto-populated those schools who requires it and who doesn't. Most schools generally require this, and I even recommend just submitting it to a school, even if they don't require it. There's different essay prompts. They only choose one of these to write their personal statement. Again, inside my course, I teach we can't get into it at the time here, really specific instructions on how to choose the topic, what they should write about, what that should look like for the personal statement, and then for the supplemental essays. But these are really just kind of to help, if your kid has no idea what to write about, to help kind of give some structure for them to write an essay. But then here it says, share an essay on any topic of your choice. So really for this personal essay, they can write about anything, and I have a lot of tips on how to write a really powerful personal statement. But what I suggest doing is for them to write it separately inside of whether it's a Google Doc or a Word document, do all of the editing, everything until it's absolutely ready, copy and paste it inside of this area once it's all done. So I don't recommend working on it inside of this box here. Wait till it's completely ready, and then copy and paste the final thing. And I'll show you at the end, before they actually submit the application to each school, they can actually review a PDF of what that essay will look like that the college admissions officers are going to receive. And absolutely make sure they do that, just to make sure they didn't copy and paste only 3/4 of the essay by accident, or there's any weird formatting issues. I know that's kind of nitty-gritty, but something that's really important. So that's everything within this Common App. I'm going to keep going real quick, but feel free to type questions if you have any questions about that. So here's where you're going to see additional questions and essays if they're there. So again, this is for Dartmouth specifically. If I want to do it for Emory, I would click on that, but we're just going to stick with Dartmouth for a second. So questions for start term would be fall of 2019. This is where they would choose early decision, regular decision. Some schools might have early action, rolling admissions. There's different parts of it. This is where they would talk about that fee waiver for each individual school. Will you be pursuing financial aid, even if you're not sure if you could get it, but you think you might, put yes. So these are some general questions about academics, different activities, different family. This is where they would put, if you have a family member, a parent, or a sibling, or someone who's ever attended Dartmouth, that's where that legacy comes in that they review. Recommendations and FERPA. Click on this. So it won't let me populate this right now because I haven't put what high school I attended, but this will once your kid has put in that information about their school, this is going to pop up to say the FERPA, for anyone who doesn't know what that is, basically waives your kid's right to have the school submit their, to give them permission to send all of their transcripts, all of that information. You have to check that. And then it'll ask if you want to waive your right to not view the letters of recommendation from teachers. So I always recommend doing this. I know it sounds intimidating, but if you don't say that you give them permission, it seems kind of fishy to colleges to say that you don't trust the teacher enough to know they might say something bad. so technically it just waives your permission to ever see what they say. Some teachers might, send you their recommendation, just show it to your kid anyway. But this kind of gives official information that you can never technically see that.
And Marissa, actually, I just found this out the other day related to the waiver for the Common App specifically, that even if you, and I completely agree, everybody should actually, sign the waiver, because you'll get it just looks the best to the colleges and the people who are going to do the recommendations. But if for whatever chance you choose not to waive it, it doesn't allow you to actually see the recommendations right now. It only gives you the option in the future when you graduate high school and you attend one of the colleges, that you can see the recommendations. So anyhow, my point is, not waiving doesn't really get you that much.
Yeah, great point. And this is also, sorry it's not populated here, but this is also where your kid will select the different, whether it's teachers, coaches. Again, it's just like the rest of the application. It's pretty straightforward once you start clicking through it, where they would select which teachers they're going to give their recommendations. They would put their email address, and then the Common Application will send them separate email notifications to the teacher to submit those recommendations. And then just because it was sent does not mean the teacher is going to do it. So I always recommend, you'll be able to see on that dashboard and if it's been submitted, but make sure your kid follows up and that everything has been submitted as it should. Review and submit. So here below for the writing supplement, this is the nuance. So in that Common App, that's where that one personal statement was. This is where this is where colleges are going to ask other specific questions, and this is why I always recommend just adding those schools that they think they might apply to, because you don't want to be surprised with an essay that you're like, oh gosh, I didn't know I was gonna need to write this. So for example, with Dartmouth, this is just specific questions, essay questions they're going to do. So this is like, what aspects of a college program, community, or campus environment attract your interest? This is basically saying, why does your kid want to attend Dartmouth specifically? So inside of my course, I give a ton of detailed information on how to answer, I call it the YS essay. You'll see this on almost every college is going to ask this in a different form of some sort. So you can see it's like talking about the Supreme Court in 1818 and all these things. But when you look at the essay, it's saying, why does your kid want to attend Dartmouth? What does Dartmouth have that is special that your kid is going to appreciate and take advantage of in their life? So it teaches very specifically how to write that. And then in these other parts of it, this is where they'll say, choose one of the following prompts and respond. So they don't have to answer all of these, but again, they have word limits. Some schools have 1 essay, some have 3 supplemental essays, so just make sure they're familiar with it. And the same thing goes to write, edit in a different word processor, get all the feedback, copy and paste it when they're ready in here. And don't go over the maximum wording. Even if it lets you, follow exactly what they say, and it should limit it. So that's everything for the My Colleges. Again, once that's all submitted, when you go back to the dashboard, you should start to see that that you've completed, filled in all of those writing requirements for each school, that you're with the deadline, that's that regular decision, early decision, the writing supplements. It should, these will turn green once everything's ready. And then that's where you will be able to, you'll see here if you click through, you haven't completed this part, I haven't completed anything, so everything is incomplete, but that's where you'll make sure, says the 2 required writing questions, that everything's done. So that's through the dashboard. So that is only 4 minutes past, that's good. That is everything in a nutshell. Are there any more specific questions? And I hope this was very helpful. Does anybody have anything following up?
So there's a question going back to recommendations. And the question is, if a college says that you can submit up to 3 recommendations in addition to the required recommendation, do they need to get the additional ones?
So you definitely don't have to. With these, people are pretty straightforward about what they mean here. Some schools are really specific of like, you may only submit 2 and like, don't submit more. Like they do not want it, follow the instructions. For the ones that are optional, do the required ones. And it really is optional. It's not like you don't have to submit more. But if your kid feels like it would add to their story, then they're saying it's okay to. So mostly schools are going to require, let's call it 2 teacher recommendations, and usually like a college counselor as well to do one for everybody at the school. But let's say maybe your kid has held a job for 2 years and they have an employer or a manager who might write something about them. Or, I was a big athlete in school, so I had a coach write something because that was a big part of my story and they knew me in a different way than the teachers did. So that's where you would do those additional ones, but don't do them just to do them. If they don't have anyone who's going to write a strong recommendation, or don't just like, if the CEO of a large company, colleges don't care about that. You don't need, really super impressive people to write a recommendation who don't really know your kid just to look good. So I hope that answers that question.
Along with the same theme of recommendations, another question is, can you submit a teacher recommendation for an optional other recommender? And the example is it's an English teacher if the other recommendations are science and math teachers.
Yep, absolutely. So those additional ones could be all teachers if you want to do more. And it is good. I like that you're calling out the different types of teachers. So, if your kid has that, if their whole story is about wanting to become a scientist and this, that, and you've taken all these science things and then you don't have a science teacher write a recommendation, that would be kind of like you're probably going to want that to help be a part of your story. If there's a more general thing, it's great to have a science teacher and an English teacher because it shows different parts of your kid and who they are and what they're capable of, and they're very different topics. So I do recommend trying to get, again, based on their story, unless it's something super specific they want to major in. If they want to major in music, make sure they have music teachers as part of it. So good question.
So this is a general question, Marissa, if you have suggestions. And basically they're asking, do you have any points when writing the essays? And I know
yes.
that's a whole nother workshop onto itself, but maybe you have like 1 or 2 tidbits.
It is. And if it's okay, Debbie, I can offer a big discount as well for the course again. I'm going to just type in, it's the same. I'm going to type in, if you guys want to college. I just sent this link here. If you guys are interested in taking the course, this link here will give you, the course is normally almost $500 that I sell. For you guys, if you click this link here, I guess we'll do it for like the next day, or I'll do it for like the next 24 hours. You can purchase it for $137. So it's a really awesome deal. And inside of that, again, like Debbie said, it could be a whole nother workshop. Like I could spend a whole day talking about essays and the different types. Inside of that course, there's a whole section dedicated to exactly how to write the personal statement, exactly how to write that why us essay, exactly how to answer specific all of those different supplemental essay questions that they'll come across. But in general, to give you some quick helpful tips, again, without diving super deep, for the personal statement, for example, for that one, I want you to think of the personal statement as not writing your kids. I say you writing. Your kid should absolutely write this, but help them along the way. They shouldn't write it's not about their whole life story. It is thinking about that story that your kid wants to tell and how they want to present themselves about who they are, what they've been interested in, in their life so far, and how college. It sounds like a lot. How college is going to help them, and then what they're going to do from there. So it should be about one specific moment in time that your kid, a moment that they learned about themselves or came across a challenge or something that they realized if they want to become a lawyer. It might be maybe they were talking to a lawyer 10 years ago excuse me, and that moment changed their life, and made them want to go to Dartmouth to, to study something so that one day they can become a lawyer and help people with immigration, something, whatever it is, like those are the specific stories you want to tell that lead to where a kid is kind of going in life. It's very hard to do. As you can, it's a lot of self introspection, and inside the course, they really help ask the right questions and choose the topics and get to that. That's the best advice I can give within a couple minutes. And again, with the YSSA, it's really a research essay about each specific school, finding, again, inside the course, I tell you exactly what to research for each school and how to write that within it. But it's to make sure that it's really specific and not just like, I like the class size and that you can, take different courses. Well, you can do that at any school, but it's like, what classes are they offering? What professors are they interested in? What clubs are they offering? Like, be so specific that could only be for that school. So that's in a nutshell what I can give you without spending 5 more hours.
And let me just throw out, this is just personal personal advice with dealing with my own 2 kids so far, and I have 1 more. And that is, please do not wait till like the night before major deadlines. So if you're applying early admissions, don't wait, until October 31st at 11 o'clock, to submit, or January or December 31st, before the January 1st deadline. Truly, the Common App has glitches, and it might go down. There's lots of things that can happen, and you and your child will freak out if you're waiting till the last minute and you're trying to submit and something doesn't go right. So,
yeah, thank you for that reminder. I always tell people to set a false deadline, like a week in advance if you can, 3 days minimum. Pretend that is the deadline and get it in, because as Debbie said, like, imagine on the Common Application how many, like, hundreds of thousands of people are going down to the last minute submitting it. Like, you'd be surprised everybody's doing it, and it really does go down. Yeah. And if you haven't submitted it by that deadline, like, that's really the deadline. It's not like things go wrong, it doesn't matter if it's not submitted. They didn't apply to that college, so it's really important.
Yeah, and then the other thing kind of going along with the getting it in as early as you can is just think if you were an admissions officer, they are truly reading all of these things, and just the reality is they kind of get burnt out themselves, or, like their eyes just start to glaze over. So I say that because I've heard that from admissions officers, and it's not that they are purposely doing that. It's just that, that it just becomes a lot of work, obviously. So the earlier you send it in and they start looking at it, the fresher they are, as people. So just keep that in mind as well. You don't want to be kind of stuck in the glut of all of the bulk of all of these applications that get sent in at once.
Yeah, good point.
Does anybody have any other questions? Okay, well, if anything comes up after, if you want to send me a message, or Marissa, if you want to put in your email, if you want, if people to send questions.
Absolutely. I'm going to type that in right now. So it's Marissa at talkcollegetome.com. If you go to talkcollegetome.com, you can find my email there as well. And again, that link, and I can send this maybe to people afterwards too. If you are interested in joining the course, it's not too late. It's still super helpful for so many parts of the essays, for choosing the deadlines. Again, like writing a resume, figuring out how to put those activities in the right order. And for the next 24 hours, we'll give that really special discount for you guys specifically who have been part of this. So let me know if you have any questions about it at all.
Marissa, there is one more question that somebody's asking, kind of related to the essay writing. The question says, I'm confused with how, if my son is writing his essay about an interest or a talent that he has a passion for, but it doesn't tie into his choice of a science major. Like, how can they write that? Or Marissa mentioned more than once to tie the future plans with your major.
So I would recommend, Janet, is this for the personal statement specifically, or is it for any of those supplemental essays maybe? You're typing as you go, but in general, like for, again, for the Comment App essays, that main one. So I really would, and again, I teach this inside of the course, it's hard to say. To me, it's really important that it does kind of tie into everything. So maybe, even if it's not like, it doesn't have to be, I'm just trying to read this again, and just traits of a science major. So it could be something totally random. Like it doesn't have to be like, I was at science camp and then I took the science class and now I want to be a science major and become a chemist. But it should tie into it in some way. This is really the space to say, again, I think of it in 3 chunks, like this is kind of what I value and what I've discovered. This is how this is why I'm applying to this college, and it's how it's going to help me in the future. And it really should, it doesn't have to be so specific of a science major, but it really should point in that direction. So we can talk offline about this. Feel free to send me an email, and I do personal sessions every now and then if you want to hash out like what that should look like and help brainstorm the right topic or how to tie in that interest that he's talking about into the story. It's hard for me to know without knowing the details, but it really kind of should follow that flow. And then maybe that interest and talent could be something they write about in one of those supplemental essays. And that should really maybe be something that isn't, you want to use the space in the essays to show things that can't necessarily be seen from the activities that are listed or from, the resume. It should be a space to kind of add additional information about who your kid is, what they value in their character, and the story that can't be told just within the activities section. So yes, I'll contact you. Great. All right. Anything else?
I think Juliana has one more question. What should you include in additional information, writing section, self-story courses, projects?
I'm not positive exactly what you're talking about, but again, this is a lot of times additional information can be information about things like if your grades maybe dropped for a semester because you had an illness in the family, or anything you want to explain. If you're, maybe your kid has great grades, but they just cannot get a high SAT score, and maybe they have testing, difficulties testing, things like that. That's what you want to put in that additional information there. The self-study courses, projects, those go in the different activities or education. I guess self-study would probably go activities, and all of those projects would be activities and resumes. Anything else? Okay. You could a great group, so many good questions. I really, really hope that this was super helpful for maybe those who haven't even been in the Common App, or just some of those nuances, so you can really, really help make sure your kid is doing everything right, because it's fairly common sense, but a lot of it is a lot of nuances that can be confusing. So hope this helps.
Thank you, Marissa. I think it was a lot of good information, and even if you've never been through it, or you filled it out and hopefully you just walked them through it one more time, kind of made people feel confident that they did it correctly, or so I guess one more question Kathy's asking: if my daughter has dysgraphia, is the additional information section the place to add this?
Yeah, if again, you don't have to tell colleges everything if you don't want to. If you feel like it has impacted parts of her GPA or scores, that's where you would kind of include that information. If that's something that hasn't affected that part, you don't have to include it. That's also something that may be a big part of her story, and maybe something she wants to include in an essay somewhere of a challenge that she has faced and overcome, or maybe that's impacted what she wants to do in the future, things like that. So there's different places you can put it. Don't feel obligated. Put it in that additional information if you feel like it's something that a college needs to know. And again, if it hasn't affected anything in a negative way, you don't have to put anything like that on the application if you don't want to.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. I'll just give you again my personal example. My middle daughter, we used that additional information section because for lots of different reasons, but she had been to 3 high schools in the 4 years of high school. So we kind of explained, why that happened, because that wasn't going to come out anywhere else. And to tell you the truth, she had some learning issues, and that was one of the reasons. But we didn't actually disclose all that information because it didn't necessarily affect her performance. So I think you have to decide whether or not you want to share that type of information with the colleges or not.
Yeah, great, helpful information.
Okay. Well, thanks again. Thanks, everybody, for showing up. Thanks, Marissa. Just if anybody's still here, I have to say this because it's always so cool. Marissa didn't even say where she is right this moment. So tell everybody where you are.
Yeah, I am currently in Chiang Mai in Thailand right now. Debbie knows I was just spent the last month and a half in Bali. So I do all of my work remotely. You will never know unless I tell you. I'm still always here to help you, always responding to emails, always helping through my course. Through different comments, doing different workshops. So I am in Asia at the moment. I love to travel. I work remotely, travel abroad. My home base is in Atlanta, Georgia. I do go back sometimes. But yeah, I am in Thailand.
I just think that's so cool. I think it's cool that people, I think, hopefully you're okay. I think it's cool if people know that.
It's like daylight coming through this room here. We're thinking 9:30. So yeah, it is, what time is it? It is almost 9 a.m. for me right now. So morning session for me.
Okay, well, Marissa, have a good day. For most everybody else, have a good evening.
Have a good night. Let me know if you guys have any questions about the course, or always, if you have any questions about this, shoot me an email as well. I'm always here to help.
Great. Thank you. Good night, everybody. Bye.